So this tutorial is going to explain how to deal with a Photoshop collage or any sort of Photoshop file that has multiple layers in Illustrator. So why would we need to do that? Why would we need to build something in Photoshop first before bringing it into Illustrator? Well, Illustrator does not have easy and simple ways of creating a photorealistic collage because that is not what it is meant to do. Illustrator does not have the quick select tool for you to select objects to get marching ants. There are no marching ants in Illustrator. So any kind of collaging that you need to do, if you need to separate things out from the background, if you need to do something like this, where I have Godzilla on its own layer in front of a layer of buildings, and then on top of this background here, you can't really do things like this in Illustrator. So again, I have the Godzilla kind of floating behind the buildings layer so that I can position her wherever I want to position her. And again, this is what very often when you're trying to do something in Illustrator, you may need to do it in Photoshop first, at least some of the stuff, to be able to do this kind of collage so that we can kind of treat all of these layers separately in Illustrator. So I'm going to just close out of this real quickly. I don't need this to be opened. Now I have the collage.psd right here. If we double click on that, it's going to open in Photoshop because that is the default program that's going to open PSD files. So you either need to right click and open with Illustrator, or you can drag it into Illustrator manually. And basically what it's going to ask is, do you want to convert the layers that are in your Photoshop file into objects? Or do you want to flatten layers into a single image? There's no reason to have a Photoshop document with multiple layers if you're going to end up flattening it in Illustrator anyway. So we want to convert the layers to objects. You can click the Show Preview button if you want. It might take a second, but it might not show up at all. But basically, I'm just going to click OK. Yes, I want to convert those layers to objects. So it's going to take a second to open in Illustrator. So the image is going to look exactly the same as it did in Photoshop. If I go into my layers, here they all are. There's the buildings, the Godzilla, and the background. They're all separate layers that can be turned on and off, just like they can be in Photoshop. The only difference is that all of your layers got renamed with the word image after it. It's kind of hard. I can't really see it there, unless I can pass this out. So this is just called the buildings image, the Godzilla image, and the background image. So whatever they were called in Photoshop, just with the word image added. So here's the thing with these. We can use our selection tool, just like I kind of showed in in the first tutorial. And we can move Godzilla around. I can move anything around, just like we can in Photoshop. They're kind of color coordinated too. If you notice, when I click on Godzilla, it has a green bounding box. If I click on the buildings in the front, that entire layer has a red box, and this one has a blue one. So again, it coordinates with the colors that you see here in your layers. The thing is, when I click on this Godzilla, for instance, the entire layer, the entire image is actually square. So that is the size and the shape of that particular image, meaning all of this around here is part of that layer and part of that image. It's just transparent. So that's why we have a square or a rectangular bounding box around any one of these layers. So let's see what happens when we image trace this. So this is exactly what you did for your logo project. We're going to image trace it. Just like your logo, the default is that anything darker than mid-gray got turned black. Anything lighter than mid-gray got turned white. So it's a very stark kind of silhouette right now, which actually looks kind of cool if that's what you're going for. But what are we going to do? How do we get our colors back? How do we get rid of this white? Like, what is up with the white? Many of these options, when we image trace an object, will end up with all of your transparency being turned into white. And we have to get rid of it somehow. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to open the image trace panel. And again, this is where we can choose the number of colors that we want or some of these other options. For instance, if I do line art, some of these don't do what you think they're going to do necessarily. Like that's what line art does, just sort of leaves these kind of weird spots around. So does that. You can kind of get in and change this threshold to see if you can mitigate that. But basically, the reason this isn't giving me a super great result with this is because there's not a ton of contrast in that Godzilla image. It was fairly dark. So it's kind of getting some weird things. If I come back here and notice that with line art and with technical drawing, the white did go away. It is back to transparency. But if I go to any of these other things like 3 colors, 16 colors, shades of gray, basically you're going to still see the white here. So let me just find something that looks kind of cool. The idea here is when we're dealing with Illustrator images, we are shying away. We're trying to get away from anything that looks super hyper realistic. So this sort of style that you see here is actually what we're going for, where all the colors are separated. It's a much more graphically oriented style than rather than being photorealistic. Still, how do we get rid of the white? Well, one way is that we go into the Advanced tab here, and we click on Ignore White. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to turn all of the white into transparency. So now my Godzilla is floating in transparency. There is no more white. I can move it around without having that white sort of blocking the background. If you don't see Ignore White as an option, it's probably because you have a different method selected, which shouldn't happen, but if you have this method here called overlapping, you'll notice that I cannot click on Ignore White. It doesn't let me. So I have to switch to the method called abutting, and then I can ignore the white from there. And of course, just like with the other tutorial I mentioned, you can change the number of colors and things here. You could even go to, like high fidelity photo and things. However, again, we don't want things to be photorealistic, so I would say to shy away from those. Think about imagery that looks more like it has been, I don't know, screen printed or kind of hand painted with large brushstrokes rather than something that's completely photorealistic. So that's basically it. There's a different way of getting rid of the white that could really matter to you. For example, when I click Ignore White, if there was actually white inside of Godzilla, if something in there was pure white, that's going to disappear too. So then you'd have a hole there, basically, that you'd have to either paint over or you have to fix somehow. A different way of getting rid of the white, if that happens, it's a little more. It's a bit more of a process, but we can definitely do that. We're first going to have to expand our image. And if you remember in the last tutorial, in which you had to do for modifying your logo, if we want to change any of these colors or do anything to this image other than just basically enlarge it or make it smaller or rotate it, if we want to change the colors inside of here manually, if we want to change the shape of something using the handles, we can't do that until we click the expand button. Here's the thing, though. Once we click expand, we're sort of stuck with this style. So once you click expand, this image trace box will be grayed out. You'll no longer be able to go in and say, oh, I want to see what it looks like with 3 colors or 16 colors. It is not going to be, you've kind of passed the point of no return. So what I'm just going to do is click on expand, and as you can see, I can no longer deal with any of this. It's just not an option. Just like with the logo, all of these colored areas now have turned into their own separate little objects. The more intricate your imagery is, the more of these green, red, blue, whatever the color of that layer happens to be, the more of those lines you'll see. Of course, when we click off, those lines go away. It just kind of happens when the image, that layer is selected. But if I want to get rid of the white now, what I'm going to do is click off so that nothing is selected. I'm going to get my direct select tool. The white direct select tool, again, allows you to click on specific colors and specific areas of color, I guess you could say, in your layer, in your group of what is now a group of images, since this has been expanded. And I can just click on the white around the outer edge, just like I did with my Batman logo. I clicked on the white and I deleted it to get rid of it because I just didn't want that big white box around it. I'm going to do the same exact thing here. I'm just going to click on the white, hit delete, and now that got rid of the white around the outer edge. It missed a little chunk of white in here, though. Because that was not connected to the white around the outer edge, that did not erase, which is, again, the only reason you would need to go this far is if you have some white areas inside that you want to get rid of. So now I'll zoom in, and I'm going to click on that little white area. Oops, I want to make sure that it's just that. I don't know why it's kind of freaking out there. Yeah, I don't know why it's I don't know. It's kind of doing some weird things here. There we go. You might have to click in there a couple times. You might need to really zoom in. I should also note that while we're zoomed in, you can now see, especially juxtaposed against the background, that our image here is a vector. It's perfectly crisp and clear. The background is still pixelated because I haven't done anything with that. And now I could say, hey, what do I want to do with the background? How do I want to treat these buildings? So I could click on the building and I could image trace that. And then maybe I'll decide what I want to do. I do not like that. Let me go into, let me just simplify this with 3 colors for everything to see what happens here. All right. What happens if I ignore the white on this? Something weird is probably going to happen because of all this white space here. I have a feeling a lot of my things are going to disappear a little bit. Oh, it doesn't look too bad. Looks kind of cool. Could do the same to the background. Could image trace that. Let's see if I turn that to 3 colors. I don't need to ignore any white on that because there's that layer basically fills the entire canvas. So there isn't going to be any white to deal with really, or to mitigate. So now we have something like this going on. So very quickly we get we get from a Photoshop collage that has 3 different raster-based, pixel-based images to this, which is now completely 100% vector. So everything here is infinitely scalable. It's a crisp, clean line. If you were to zoom in, I'm not super happy with the colors that are going on here. I think this is blending in a little bit too much from the background. So I would probably want to do something to make the Godzilla stand out a little bit more. But that's for a different tutorial. So again, this is how you can deal with a Photoshop file that has multiple layers in Illustrator to basically ensure that everything in your collage is vector, which from here on out, every single Illustrator assignment will require it to be 100% vector, nothing left raster or pixel based. And then again, I also explained how to get rid of the white that might be around the outer edge of your layer.